Welcome, everybody, to this first call regarding the book Birthing the Symbiotic Age. And just want to tell you how much I appreciate you all for sticking it out. It's been almost a year since I started launching some of the materials, posts, and then formally the book came out in the beginning of January. I'm just going to go through the agenda to kind of give you an idea what to expect. We're going to keep it at this size in terms of just have a general meeting, and today not do breakout groups. The first item on the agenda is I'm going to share, I guess what I'll call it is the story behind the story, about the writing of the book, what I've been learning in getting to know many of you. The second item on the agenda is to give you an opportunity to interact and ask some questions that you might have. And third, we're going to talk about get your understanding of how some of the material that you've read, how it may be helping you or could help you personally and also in your community efforts. And then the last item four is just to go into some closing remarks about the way forward. And I'd first like to acknowledge a couple folks. One is Steve Behrman. And I was going to say he's on the upper left-hand corner, but that's just to me. Steve, maybe introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks. I just unmuted myself. Richard and I have been friends for, I don't know, since the mid 2000s. I featured his conscious community network in the book I wrote with Bruce Lipton, Spontaneous Evolution. I've been tracking this work for a long time and was very excited when Richard decided he wanted to do a book. And so I signed on to help him write this book, and it's one of the best things I've ever done.
Oh, hey, thank you very much. And I also want to acknowledge there's one person who's here on the call who was actually part of the community effort 20 years ago, well, 15 years ago. Just wanted to acknowledge Fred Jackalot, if you don't mind saying a few words. You're still in Reno.
Yes, yes, I haven't abandoned Reno. Uh, yeah, I met Richard. I can't remember when, but in the early 2000s, and participated in many of the events that he organized over the time that he was here in Reno. And I really, really enjoyed the work he did. I am just an individual. I wasn't part of the uh, restaurateurs or any of the Food Network things that he put together. But it was quite a wonderful experience. I still have a lot of the material from back in those days. Looking forward to the final publication.
Excellent. Speaking of a lot of material that we put together, back then it was a lot of paper. And we had a recycling event at a what we called the Conscious Community Celebration. And I'm remembering somebody that was involved in our original core group said that they were doing recycling of paper materials. And he said I had produced so much paper, like, like documents and emails and everything that it was, you could fill a couple trucks but at least we recycled it. So thank you all for being here. And I just want to give you maybe 15 minutes or less. And maybe Steve, if you could like wave or like, use like one of those things where you just pull somebody off the stage. Um, as many of you know, the book is, a reflection of part autobiography going back 50 years, as well as ideas and concepts that I'm kind of overlaying into the story to provide this narrative arc of how I began to develop what I call now a connection to an ancient blueprint, a pattern underlying to me as a young man growing up, something that to me was underlying the nature of reality. Then I began to see it within nature and how natural systems and ecosystems reflected this underlying, let's call it a spiritual pattern. And I began to ask the question when I was, in my, early teens, if there is this underlying pattern or an order where a human being can experience oneness, unity, a connection, feeling that we're part of something and that there's something bigger than us and that we're all connected, and that you could see that within nature in its reflection. Why isn't human society organized in the same way? So that's been one of the main questions. And maybe it's an obvious question, but it's something that's been occupying me my whole life. And it was the dissonance, I think, as I opened my heart to what was happening in the world at 12, 13, 14. As I opened my heart, it really, I'd have to say, I started experiencing the suffering, not just of myself, my family, but the world. And it broke my heart as a little kid, and it's that dissonance between this beautiful experience that I had within that spiritual awakening that I described. It's the dissonance between that and what was happening in the human world and society. It was that dissonance that drew me in to the suffering and to want to do whatever I could to find an answer to the question, can we live differently? And it drew me into community. So the original, first attempt to write this book was almost 20 years ago in 2006. I actually wrote the first probably 6 chapters. And then in 2010, you might have read in the book how I developed a training guide. And as part of it, it was probably 260 pages. And that was something I described in the book. And then fast forward to 2019, it was another attempt to finish the book, wrote a 20-page outline with another friend and editor, and then realized that I just didn't have the bandwidth. And then fast forward through to COVID. And during COVID, probably, I think it was, it would be 2001. So almost 4 years now writing this book every day. And Steve Behrman has, we've been working on this together for more than 3 years. And what's interesting about it in 2022, as you might have remembered, well, actually, it's the story to come. In 2022, I was in Sri Lanka for 6 months, and I was living there during the upheaval, and I was supporting Sarvodia, and I was, spending more time with Dr. Aryadatna and his son Vinya. Aryadatna was managing the affairs of the nationwide Sarvodia movement, and I went there just to be able to be supportive. Ended up helping support an initiative to build a food banking system within the country. They hadn't had that experience in the same way as in the United States. And as many of you know from my own story, I was the director of the San Diego Food Bank in the late 90s. So I took that experience there. When I returned back to Hawaii in 2022, around July, coincidentally, I got a call from a woman who wanted to begin to develop a local food system network in her county. So we started these meetings where it was more like hands-on and practical, building that food system network. And we met every Friday, and it was to some extent to begin a training process. She invited some of her friends, some of them were global, so her network, and they were like auditing. So they were like observing me working with this wonderful woman who was very concerned about global food supply chains at the time. So it was like, right during COVID in 2022. So after a couple months of that, I realized something that while I was involved in this practical effort to build a system, help her to build a system in her county in Florida, what I did realize was that there was a lot of inner development needed. And I at that time, I wasn't really covering it in that way in the manuscript at the time. At the time I had the manuscript, a version of it done. And then I realized that in order to develop these new systems and structures in local community, that we needed to develop new systems and unified structures within us. So in order to unify a community and bring it together, we ourselves had to have an understanding or an experience of that. It was at that point that I decided to discontinue those meetings to build this external food system. And I realized that I needed to just finish the book. So for the last year, probably year and a half, I've been deepening what was before an existing manuscript by going much deeper than I had anticipated. So the book that I ended up with wasn't the book that I started out to write. I started really focusing on external systems more from the point of view of a how-to, like, okay, do this, do this, do that. And then I realized that those outer systems reflect inner systems of thought, inner systems of connection to the heart, inner systems of being able to actually hold space for a community, to know how to unify a community. But there's a bunch of, I call them landmines. As you know in the book, I refer to our culture as a battlefield. And then within battlefields, sometimes there are landmines. But there are cultural landmines, the political divisions, polarization, religious division, the separation between secular and spiritual and religious, and it's a myriad of divisions. And we carry those. We get in our conditioning, we are inculcating those without knowing it. So the cultural landmines are things like, how do you build a local food system network where you are making sure that you involve all the different what were divided groups, making sure that the churches are involved, that civic culture is involved, local government, activist groups, conventional farmers, regenerative farmers. In other words, that to be able to hold that kind of space, it really requires a predisposition to wanting to unite the community. And wanting to unite a community means that you, to some extent, have to overcome any division within yourself. Anything that you're promoting, any identity that you're promoting, that you're really excited about, of course, you'd like to try to, tell others and get them to join. But building a community is much broader than that. So it was that process that led to wanting to release the book as a digital series. That idea just came up intuitively, and I hadn't known about Substack at that point, and I just had an inner guidance to do that, and just began, transferring my old email list to Substack and just starting to make connections. And when I started releasing the book, what I noticed was that when I digested a small part of a chapter, so instead of one chapter being released every week, I generally made a post of 2,000 to 3,000, 4,000 words. That allowed me to just really spend days and days, and that's what I've been doing for this last year, days and days doing a deeper dive and an edit. And part of it is interactive. I've been interacting with many of you who've been giving me feedback that in real time, I'm bringing the book up to current reality, like what's actually happening. And speaking with many of you allows me to understand a lot more about what the needs are and how to orient the languaging. So the language was a big part of creating this book in really looking at more universal language that wouldn't peg me in one particular tribe or camp. And that is really hard to do. It's extremely hard to be able to overcome our own predisposition to use languaging from our tribal affiliations. But that was part of the effort in moving forward. So it's been a co-creation, and I want to thank each and every one of you for the feedback, whether on emails or phone calls or comments. And what I'd like to do before we move on is I wanted to share the results of the survey that many of you participated in. I think I'd like to document it in the video, and I try to highlight it before we go to the next section where I'm asking you all to share. So basically, in this survey, what was really interesting is the majority of the top three things that people are interested in: systems change, community building, and bridging divides. System change is actually number one. Health, new economy, regenerative cultures, and local food systems. That's interesting to me. And I'd say most of the people that put down their religious or spiritual affiliation put down generally spiritual, some variation of that. I found that very interesting as well. So I'm just going to go through some of the actual responses. The question was asked, how do you feel about the book? This person said, how the spiritual foundation of human evolution underpins all that we may strive to do as a community. Another response, learning about Dr. Ari and Sarvodia has been transformational. That the work in Sri Lanka could be translated into practical terms to Western cultures offers great hope and inspiration. It has been validating and reaffirming what I've found in my own work, how to speak to the intelligence, heart, and humanity in others. And then the last point somebody made was the mix between visionary and practical is unusual. So the next section will be any challenges or problems. I really wanted to just share what some of you have been thinking. The first person said, discomfort with you speaking about Jesus Christ rather than our own inner wisdom and authority because of being abused by traditional Christianity's, quote, superiority, proselytizing, and colonial attitude. Second, I had to get past the word Christianity and realize the ideas presented from the organized religion actually resonate with my own personal spiritual beliefs. I thought that was really interesting too. Another person, the length and the laboring of the religious angle. This will get in the way of action takers who already get where you're coming from and are hungry for a proposed implementation plan. Another person, as someone with deeply spiritual experiences, I found the religious angle overly burdensome and off-putting. And then the opposite actually was really interesting because it was somebody from Reno who was there, said, I didn't think you were that spiritual. I was really curious. And then the last is, I didn't feel drawn to engage in it until today because of the long, drawn-out, drip approach of only releasing a bit at a time. I need to inhale the whole thing at once. That seems to be resonating with a lot of people. The next question, what are you most excited about? The possibility of being small islands of coherence that could shift the entire system to a higher order, and doing that from within the energy of spirit. Somebody said, excited about the replatforming of God. Another said, being a shared self with one eye on the transcendent and the other towards our neighbor. Another person, a culture of reintegrating heart coherent connections for mutual benefit. The last person said, excited about a commonwealth of community republics, each with their own network commons. So the next question, what is inspiring about the book? Somebody said, your experience and examples of bringing spirit's presence into matter. Another said the real world application of virtues to support community life. Another said that it's the way history and the core of humanity for the good of the planet and the cosmos are the driving force for evolution. The possibility that we could rise above today's co-created maelstrom and bring forth a protopia, a benevolent global society built on a firm foundation of beloved local communities and beneficent relations with all life. Another said it feels tangible and achievable, both practical and visionary. It's a meta-modern glimpse into what our systems could become, interconnected, adaptable, and symbiotic. The last one, for me, the most inspiring idea in the book is that humanity can become connected again with each other and all beings on Earth through universal spiritual ideas, love, and mutual respect. And then this couple more things. Question, what would be helpful, more helpful? Having the book available as a whole, it's a common theme. Provide a more succinct offering soon and then do a follow-up book. Another is, while the stories are heartwarming, perhaps a user manual might be more helpful for those who just want to get on and do it. And then finally, can we get the book soon? You know, it's really good to read, and many of you are on the call who submitted your responses, and I really appreciate it. And towards the end of the meeting, as we hopefully have some more dialogue in the next 40 minutes or so, I'm just going to share some thoughts based on the survey and hopefully this call in terms of the direction and how to get the book out as soon as possible, because it's almost 4 years, and based on what's happening in the world, I think, and it's hard to imagine, but the timing in an odd, bizarre, reverse kind of way keeps getting better and better. In other words, as things seem to be like, just when you talk to people that you might not have seen for a month, we have connections in Europe, and it's like a month goes by, and just when you think things couldn't get any crazier, or just it's hard to understand or make sense of what's happening, it happens, and it just keeps getting more and more like that. So that's the field that this book is going to emerge in. And I've been doing my best to be sensitive to that field by listening to you. And the future, I imagine, is going to be more co-creation with y'all. So let me just shift. I know that was a lot, but I wanted to get that, since we're recording it, I think be for the benefit of a lot of other people who hopefully will watch this. So I want to go to the next part of the agenda, and this is where you get to, if you would like, ask questions. So I guess my question is there anything that you've read that you'd like me to respond to right now? And that could be things that you want to highlight that made things that were clear to you, something about the book that helped you with some clarity. The second would be things in the book that you're unclear about. And the last thing would be things that surprised you, or pretty much anything that's really coming up from your mind or your heart right now. And please just do it in 30 seconds or less. Try to be concise so we can get as many, get as much feedback. So things about the book that made things clear for you, things that you're unclear about from the book, things that surprised you, or any other thing. So keep this focus on the book at this point, not so much on what you're doing in your own projects and efforts, but let's just for this item, just keep it focused on the concepts in the book. So if you would maybe raise your hand if you would like to communicate. Well, I'll just start right now with Michael, if you don't mind unmuting. Thank you.
Richard, just a quick comment as we get into the rest of this discussion. Just kudos to you for taking on the challenge of recording your life story and making it so relevant to us. So, without commenting on any of the questions you wanted to say, I'll just take my hat off to you. I know it was a little harsh in some of my feedback in the survey, but I really respect the work you're doing and just wanted to congratulate you on it. Thank you.
Appreciate that. Did you have a question or a comment, Michael? Okay. Anybody else would like to share? You could just use the raising your hand function.
You can even just raise your hand like that. You can do that.
Yes, if you could unmute Sharam.
Hi, I had a browse through, did a little bit of homework before the call, as you asked for us to do. So I haven't read the book. I look forward to reading it through. I think it brings together, from what I see, a lot of different concepts that, as you said, described very well. I'm actually quite, I was quite shocked recently because I found that, a lot of the ideas in the book and at the community level, they've already been operating, even throughout the patriarchy, the last 4,000 or 5,000 years. I think the communities have always been, in fact, symbiotic and trying to work in that way, also in the family level. A lot of people have been trying to apply that. I think that, what's been coming top down has been sabotaging, our culture as humanity, has been destroying our souls and our relationships, with ourselves, with nature, with one another. So I think, from what I see, I mean, it's really nice that we are recovering this kind of ancestral inheritance, of what belongs to us. I think we all have it in our hearts, in our, our being. But what I was quite surprised, when somebody said to me, look, he said, we're already doing it. We've always been doing it. It's just that they don't let us. They just keep blocking our way. Or, I think the saddest thing for me is when I realized, in fact, I was following Manish Jain, who started Complexity University in India, which is the school of unlearning. Part of the kind of the D school program that he went to, the top universities in the US. And he said, I've been trying for 20 years to unlearn everything they taught me. And when he went back to India, and he put it in LinkedIn, he said, my top education was my illiterate grandmother from the village. So, I think it's such a difficult job, to de-educate ourselves, from the kind of the Abrahamic religious kind of dogma, the cultural, I'm not talking about the spiritual aspects of, many religions, but, so much political dogma in the education system. So I think it's, nice that, we got to this point, and I think it's all coming together, it seems. Yeah. And in fact, I congratulate you that Trump won the elections because I think can't get worse. The second time around, I think it's, at least I think it seems like, the way he communicates and everything is so much more honest than, what's been happening. I mean, at least that's my personal view, is that it just seems like this kind of two political divides that happens everywhere is like really the same thing, So
Sharam,
maybe things have to get worse.
Oh, Sharam, thank you so much. I really appreciate your words, and in the interest of letting other people speak, I'm not going to
exactly.
I'm not going to respond right now. I'm going to keep it in mind what you said, but thank you so much. If you don't mind remuting yourself, Sharam. Let's see. Next is Jana. If you could unmute.
Hi, Richard. Hi, everyone. This has been amazing. I think what is, surprised me or shocked me is, as a Sri Lankan, been in London for nearly 30 years, and I've been in this search for going back home, kind of a phase I'm in. I've just turned 50, and I didn't even know that Shodaya movement is existed in Sri Lanka at this level of impacting 5,000 the communities around that region. So first of all, I wanted to say amazing that it feels like I don't need to start on my own. There's always some amazing work has been done already. There is definitely a calling for me to go back home. And one more thing is not unclear because I come from the north part of Sri Lanka. I probably know
Yeah.
the historical impact of the war. Is there any other Dr. Ari's work really started to impact in the northern part of Sri Lanka? Do you know any other impact has really trickled upwards?
Yes,
So I'm not sure.
one of the amazing stories was in the beginning of the Civil War. Um, Sargodie was really quick to bring together 5,000 uh, Tamil youth and 5,000 Sinhala youth, and they brought them together in a community to work together. And it was really beautiful. So there was a pretty uniform in terms of throughout the country in Sarvodia's
Yeah,
presence. And they're still going. Dr. Adi, he passed
yeah, I
in
heard. Yeah,
April this year, and as many of you might have seen the video I did, I went to the state funeral there, and his son Vinya Adiaratna, who's a medical doctor, and he's been in the role of the executive of the movement, and they're really doubling down on what they call Arthradhamma, which basically, to some extent, is going to translate as the new economy movement. So they're really going deeper, even into the 5,000 communities that are
oh
already
wow,
been involved for decades. They're really going deeper, and I'm going to talk about that
great.
at the end of the book. And thank you, and welcome
Thank you, Richard. Yeah,
here.
thank
Thank
you.
you,
Thanks.
Jana. Kyle, next.
Uh, Thank you, Richard. My thoughts go to a question about, I guess, marketing. How do you get this brilliant work to go viral? How do you get your book into the hands of those that can catalyze an uptake and a digestion of all this wisdom and ideas? And because as the institutions that we've all become dependent upon, they're collapsing. We're losing faith. People are losing faith in these institutions, in the economics behind them collapsing. Yes, of course, this is what we need. So I'd be interested in your thoughts and maybe Steve's as to how you're going to what's your strategy on making the book and the ideas behind it go viral and reach a lot of people in the right places?
Great question. So one of the main ideas and something I learned a year ago when I started, before the book actually was released, I started engaging specifically leaders of existing global and national networks, and also those kinds of networks that had a local community presence. They already had like a chapter. So I was looking for movement leaders from different threads of radically different kinds of movements who were global and yet also local. And what I realized is part of let's just call it a distribution strategy of the idea. It is in those conversations, what I learned was I started traditionally, because it's our programming, to, in a sense, talk about symbiotic culture in the book as if it was something separate from them, kind of like it was maybe appearing like, how these normal conversations between leaders, generally people have to be protective, competitive, because people are promoting their thing. And there's thousands of wonderful movements out there. What I realized straight away is I didn't want to do that. And that symbiotic culture, the way it actually manifests itself in a one-to-one conversation between leaders, it wasn't I'm telling them what I'm doing and trying to get support for what I'm doing. I literally showed up for them and I wanted to find out what they were doing. I wanted to listen to what they were doing, and I wanted to find if there was a way that symbiotic culture and the concepts and ideas could help them. So I totally reversed the nature of the kind of competitive relationship. So symbiotic culture is about this service to other. But the irony is service to other actually turns out to be the same as service to yourself. When you can get to that mind and heart space, when there is no distinction, when it's what I call a shared self, with one eye on the transcendent and one eye on your neighbor, on others, then your way to engage is radically different. So what happened was it opened up a sense of more trust. So when I, as a leader and as an author, am I communicating about this idea, when I was open to what they're doing and how I could help them, that really removed a potential barrier because they didn't see me as a competitor, but as a supporter. So one of the strategies, Kyle, is to, once these leaders, and there's leaders that involve millions and millions of people already, once those leaders get a sense that I'm not setting up a competing network, like I'm not myself building a global organization, I'm more providing a framework, a protocol through symbiotic culture DNA that can be applied in any context. So the idea now is to communicate through those existing global networks, that they see how this is related to what they're doing, and they become a distribution channel for the idea, for the book in the first phase. How that's manifesting right now, and I did get permission. One network that I'm working with is called GATE, and it's a global network of artists and creatives. And it was founded in 2010 in Los Angeles. And it involves one of the 12 common needs areas, arts and culture. So they invited me to share symbiotic culture within their leadership of their organization. So now I am participating in this global network, which aims to build local chapters of artists and creatives, which I believe are as important as, say, local food systems. Our artists and creatives are the ones that are going to be communicating new culture through all of the myriad of artistic and cultural forms. It's always been that way. So I'm excited about that. So that's an example. That's a model. I've been in talks with other networks. Bloom Network Earth is another example of great work that they're doing, where they have 26 chapters worldwide of what's called Bloom Network Earth, and they're doing regenerative community development. And there's a number of other networks like that. Great question. Thank you. Ellen.
Hi, that's a perfect lead up to my question/comment. I view myself as a spider between networks. I fell in love with this book because they're the concepts that I know I have in my heart. I'm protopian and idealist, and I just got my PhD in transformative studies. So I'm like, I'm a doctor changing the world. This is what I want to do. But the issue that I'm finding, you addressed in chapter 6 a little bit, is economics and capitalism and money. There's so many good groups out there, independent publishers, journals. I read so many journals, and they're all want to work together, but they have to compete for funding. And it's like, how many of these organizations can I belong to or contribute every month? So I believe we are on the bridge, building the bridge to the new paradigm, to a symbiotic culture, or to devastation and extinction. So I'm curious about the specifics of while we're still in this money-based capitalism, especially in the United States, how are we able to get the silos and the network silos to work together instead of having to struggle for money? And also, a lot of people who know this stuff can't even afford to think about it because they're struggling paycheck to paycheck. So how do we help get them involved so that they have their basic needs met while we're doing this work. And thank you so much for your work. I love this.
Thank you, Ellen. Let me see if I can answer the last part of your question. For myself, I've been involved in social, economic, political, cultural movements since probably late 70s, early 80s. One thing I've noticed is there seems to be a disconnect, especially before when I was identifying more as a progressive left of center type person and activist. What I notice now looking back, there was a disconnect between promoting certain ideas and actually creating economic viability for those ideas. So invariably, the people that were activists were always generally hungry, starving, and not financially sustainable. So that is common. That's probably just been the way it has been. So what I've learned when I describe chapter 6 that you're mentioning about what I call the virtuous economy, the organizing approach is not separate from the community, and it's not separate from our own lives and our own financial and economic needs. They have to all go together for that to be sustainable as a movement. I don't mean sustainable in an environmental sense. I meant financially sustainable. So it's got to be a win-win for everybody. So at the root of a local economy, the local living economy network, for example, its purpose is to lift all boats. So it's not just for business people or leaders of organizations. It's for everyone that's participating, and to make sure also that its focus is on what we could call the least of us. Okay, so that's part of an answer, which is any kind of movement that you build has to incorporate financial sustainability for the participants. It has to be built in. So we're talking about mutual aid, we're talking about trading, we're talking about, building, financial and relationships that are mutually beneficial. So it's trying to lift all boats financially as well. So it's not just an idea. It's not an ideology. It's not like some ideology that's separate from the community. It's basically the idea that building community resilience, and that is, if you will, the frame. So that's part of it. And the beginning part of your question, Ellen, you got to remind me. Sorry about that. You had started talking about, okay, how do we get people together? So as part of symbiotic culture and the approach, it's based on an idea, no matter which of the 12 needs that we've identified, and local living economy is one, built into that is a development within ourselves before we, actually do this kind of work, is acknowledgement of the need to bring all the different sectors together. There's a challenge today in many of the movements, for example, many of the regenerative movements. Literally, I talked to some of their leaders, and they are telling me explicitly their strategy is not to integrate to the mainstream economy, that they have a belief and a strategy that they want to bring together just regenerative enterprises and organizations. And they believe that they could create a parallel economy in that way. From my experience, that's misguided, and it's not going to work. The reason it won't work is it's isolated from the source of capital that may seem to be part of the, quote, from their perspective, enemy. But nonetheless, Sarvodia and symbiotic culture, it's a coming together of being independent, but also dependent and connected to the existing system. I see no other way other than to navigate that uncertainty. So that's the first thing, or the second thing. The last is, I don't characterize our economic system as capitalism simply because it's a pejorative word. It's not helpful, especially because, as I share in my book, I don't believe it's real in its purest form. So both the left wing and the right wing have their versions of it. We live probably in a more corporatistic oligarchy where there's a merging of political and corporate interests. So we're in a duopoly in the United States and Europe with their parliamentary systems. It's part of the same kind of system. And the idea is that we need to focus on unifying local communities rather than it being like, and this is what I make comments all the time when I see people talking about being against capitalism, against, or being post-capitalist. That's literally like saying I'm against a hurricane. You can't be against a hurricane. It's a natural phenomenon. So within, quote, capitalism is something deeper. Its origin is within a materialistic worldview. So the challenge is the materialistic worldview, which actually originated in the 5th century BC in Greece. And I believe it was Democritus who started talking about breaking down nature into, particles. It was that belief system that's 3,000 years old that we need to evolve. We don't need to even oppose materialism, because you can't oppose materialism. Who would want to do that? It's just irrational to do that. So we have to find a way to transform it. And that's why spiritual development and getting people to focus on mutual aid and support and on their neighbors rather than consumption, ultimately, that's the only solution, is that it's got to be a market-based approach where people are choosing a new culture and implement it in the real world. It's not going to be brought at the UN or national level. I mean, expecting them to implement a radical restructuring of the planet, it's not going to happen that way. So that's anyway, my belief is there's already movements of people, millions of organizations and billions of people already doing good. The idea is to find ways to connect them, to become a new function in community. And it's an evolutionary function. You become a weaver of the entire community, not just progressive left wing or right wing or Christian or secular or civic activist or regen, all of them together. The vision has to be big enough to contain all of the energy that's present within local communities and what exists within humanity. That way, you're not building a separate project. You're enhancing what exists. You're providing a connectivity function, and you're injecting symbiotic culture DNA, which we hope will be transformative, because it's a fractal that can be injected in any particular context: a street, a family, an organization, a network, a corporation, a government. It's scalable because it's a fractal. It's a principle. And that's what's important today. We need a principle that is capable of being introduced at any scale. Thank you for that. Gary. Oh, Steve?
Yeah, a very quick comment. One of the ways to have an impact on the local economy right away is relocalization. More money circulating through the economy rather than flowing outside of the local economy, upward and outward in extractive ways. So the more we create ways for more money to be circulating inside, the chapters that you've written in the book, Richard, that relate to how to keep that money, the buy local movements, the sourcing local, that really is very powerful in having more money circulating, meaning more benefit, more value through the community.
Thank you, Steve. Gary.
Okay, thanks. First of all, I just wanted to say that I've been reading your chapters as they come out. They're very good. I'm really inspired, really impressed with the ideas. I didn't know about Sarvodia before. That sounds great. I wonder, are they continuing to grow and become more powerful within Sri Lanka? But also, it sounds like you've done parallel work in Reno, Nevada, and then more recently, you've been building a communication network to link them all. And the question is, what's the current status? Do you still have this network of communities in Reno or elsewhere? Are you building that? Is that growing? And what is happening with this communication system? Is it up and running? What does it do? Are people using it?
That's an excellent question, or questions. I'll start with the last one. The update on what's happening is in the last chapter, but I'll give you an advanced look at it. Essentially, the question about what happened to the networks in Reno, I've shared a little bit of that, Gary, in chapter 10 regarding the evolution from scattered networks, when we started, to coherent, cohesive buy local, food systems, neighbor networks, arts and culture. Those networks came together. And at the time, I just didn't have the bandwidth. And as you remember in the story, I shifted to developing the technology infrastructure through One Sphera, which I still haven't yet gotten to that part of the story. But for a variety of reasons, after 4 years working on that communications technology, and I'll explain more in the book chapters to come, in the post to come on that. But that infrastructure and architecture of that technology exists. It just wasn't, all of it wasn't built out. Regarding the status of the movements, to some extent, they evolved in parallel, like the local food system network and local economy networks, to some extent were rebranded. So simply because at the time I didn't have the knowledge that I do now about the needs for building, greater participation and cultivating more core leadership functions. They're still there, but they're not as coherent as it was before. About Sarvodi in Sri Lanka, as I said, Dr. Ari passed in April. His son Vinya is really carrying on the work. And when I was there almost 3 years ago, the evolution was just really strong. They were kind of doubling down back to the village and local economies, and they were getting really micro-focused on building supply chain. So they looked at it from a real technical point of view with what Steve had mentioned, which was to identify import substitution opportunities. For example, just a concrete example, when I was there, I met a gentleman in a village who was producing an aloe vera drink. So local aloe, other ingredients from throughout Sri Lanka. It was really costly to buy ingredients even from the northern part of Sri Lanka, and a supply chain focus would develop regional supply chains and sources of materials so that it could actually be closer to home. Even though Sri Lanka is, a small island, these types of economies are regional. So he was looking at opportunities for getting some of the ingredients that could be produced in his smaller region that he was buying outside the area. That kind of decision making, imagine it happening over thousands of products, ingredients, services. Relocalizing is phenomenal, and they were doing it systematically in Sri Lanka. That is, they were really looking at what the assets were. They were mapping all the assets, and they were beginning to start connecting them and looking for opportunities to substitute any imports from a local region. This idea is very important today. The idea of a commonwealth of strong regional economies, I believe, is the singular most important galvanizing, unifying idea for humanity. And the beauty of it is it's been literally pioneered by Mahatma Gandhi in his vision for India as a commonwealth of village republics. From a Hindu perspective, Dr. Ari in Sri Lanka, from a Buddhist perspective, implemented that. Even Thomas Jefferson, as a dissenting voice in the foundation of the United States, he was promoting the opposite of strong federal government. He was called an anti-federalist, and his vision, I kid you not, it was 200 and more years ago, a commonwealth of ward republics. A ward is like the New England township model of a smaller village, if you will, in the New England states. But look at the universality of this idea from Thomas Jefferson to Mahatma Gandhi to Dr. Ari. It's hundreds of years old. That means it keeps popping up in the context of empire. And how do you deal with extraction? And I believe that's a universal idea. And I'm happy to say, I'm not promoting it as mine. I'm saying that let's look at this pattern. I believe that's part of the ancient blueprint. That's why it emerges like that. Even like I mentioned in the book, the Catholic Church's principle is subsidiarity, and it has to do with emphasizing local capacity, both economic and political. What decisions that you can make locally, don't make them regionally, nationally, or globally. Make them locally. So even the Catholic Church in the late 1800s were adopting that principle in their interpretation of what they thought the early Christian communities were like. That's what really excites me. It's not because it's my idea at all. It's because I discovered something that seems to be a universal pattern, and it's available and accessible and understandable. Thank you, Gary. Jack. Oh, you're muted, Jack.
Okay. Yeah, I have two questions, I guess, or two things. One is there a place where this group is able to contact each other and kind of get together so that if somebody says something here that interests me, that I know how to get in touch with him or her. And then the other thing is, have you had much contact with what we call the social solidarity economy? People, the solidarity that exists, throughout the entire planet. I mean, they're in 6 different continents.
Thank you,
So I
Jack.
was wondering if you've had any contact on
Sounds like two
with
questions.
that, or any desire to.
No, I understand the two questions. So the first one is about, and this is the second time it's come up, so it's kind of bubbling up in this space, which is in already existing infrastructure to achieve this. So right now, my approach was releasing the book for the first year to start a public conversation and dialogue. And right now, there's maybe around 5,000 readers. At any given time, maybe half or more of the people are opening up, I'm hoping, and I'm getting some interaction. So that was the first phase. What I've learned in 40 years of organizing is you don't push. You just don't push. If you push, you get burnt out. Instead of pushing, you sense. You sense. You use your sense making with yourself and with others, and you kind of sense what might be the needs. And what I'm sensing is obviously there's a need for this, and that's why I'm going to move forward with getting the book out. My hope is early spring 2025, and the approach is, and I guess the analogy is, I want to get the book out so it could breathe, so that more and more people could start reading it before trying to organize anything or anybody. And I know many of you are already doing good work and anticipating wanting to, be, gung-ho and doing more. And I really appreciate that. But from my perspective, this has been a 10,000-year-old problem in the development. And that, yes, things are accelerating in an existential risk category, that's for sure. But my tendency is not to ignore the anxiety and the fear, but to try to keep a solid grounding in myself. And that's why I see this as stages. I want to get the book out. I want to have it percolating for the first 6 months to a year. And at that point, then what I'm hopeful to do would be the people that are interested in implementing, that I'll help them to develop a platform so we can communicate with each other, learn from each other, and co-create. And rather than me imposing some idea, I would call it like an IKEA. I don't know if anybody's bought an IKEA piece of furniture, like a dining room set, where you've got to assemble it step by step. Before I do something like that, as I'm hearing more of you talk, I think it's important that we do that together, that I get the book out. And then once the book is out, those that are excited by it and want to learn, then that group of people form a communication system amongst themselves, because you got to keep it, coherent. And those are the folks that we're going to actually help develop a step-by-step training guide. I can't develop it alone from on high and then just somehow dispense it. I don't think that's the healthy way to do it. From my experience in business, in my experience being an entrepreneur, what I've learned is you really have to sense into what the needs are. But how would I know precisely what the needs are around the planet? But if people read the book and then we're interacting together and they're coming from around the world, that's how I'm going to get the feedback, and we're going to together co-create something that will be universal and more likely to succeed, rather than me doing something arbitrarily and just like, coming from on high. That was your first question. What was the second one, Jack?
Okay, I'm going to repeat it, but my question actually wasn't so much about implementation of coming together for that. My question was more just being able to talk to each other and contact each other. Like if I had something going on, somebody else had something going on, I could contact them just for us to talk a little bit about doing something.
Well,
So,
look, right now, I appreciate what you're saying. Yeah, there's no setup to do that. However, for those of you that want to connect with each other, why don't you start by putting your contact info in the chat? Just put your LinkedIn URL or your email address and what your interest is. At least then today, we can capture it in the chat. Does that sound good as a start?
sounds like a good start, yeah.
And then let's keep in touch, Jack, about systems. My focus is on finishing the book. It's got to be on that. I can't. It's hard for me to do other kinds of functions. So I think the best thing I can do for people is to get the book out. Let me move on next to, thank you, Jack, to Marie. If you could unmute, there we go.
Here we go. Okay, well, I have to admit, I'm going to come clean and say that I have read the book. Okay, and why I'm here is not just to be curious, but I am curious. I'm curious because it's probably been close to 30 years that I live in America. I've lived in a number of different places around the country. Born and raised in my early years in New York. And so what I have seen is so many fragments of people trying to build community. There was someone, and I was trying to remember the name of the organization that he put together, had an actual plan that if you lived in a city that was, I forget what the number was, but it was, a moderately, not a little small town, but a good sized community, but not big, certainly nothing like Atlanta or New York. And that never made it. Okay. So I'm not saying that to say this is not going to make it, because I'm very impressed with everything I saw here. I'm at this point in my life where I've got at least a good 10 or 15 years where I can actually help implement something like this. But I have to read the book, and then maybe we can have a conversation. But my main thing is like to feel like I'm being used in a way that that I can help something great like this. That using the skills and the abilities that I have, which I'm public speaker, many subjects, you name it, I can do it. Okay. I'm not afraid of the size of the crowd. It can be small, it can be large, whatever you want it to be. But that's not my role. Your role is to finish the book. Yes. And I'm dying to start reading it now. And I know I'm going to sit there and read it until it's done, because I want to tie it together. You see, because, and I have a story which I think is really pertinent to, just a brief story. It was a TEDx talk. A man from an Italian organization in Africa. They went there, spend the money, help raise, teach them how to farm so they can have food to eat. Okay, so they figured they had it all figured out because they've done this before in other places, so they knew what they were going to do. So they found this fertile piece of land and they started and food was coming out of every plant that they put there. Okay. However, so the next day, after all that everything is blooming here, they find that there's no food left on the branches. Okay. So they said to the villagers, what happened here? And they said, well, that's why we don't plant there, because there are animals that come in here and eat the food as soon as we make it. So he said, well, what the and what he realized is that we forgot to ask the people. So I was real impressed you made a remark about that, is to listen. So they stopped everything they were doing and they went around to the village and started talking to people on the street about what was the need that they could do and put their heads together to create an answer to the problem that they were facing. So I've got a lot of notes here, and we'll talk after I read the book. Okay. Because my whole idea is that working with small businesses and solving problems, that's what I've done since I was a child. How do we stop mama from screaming? And so you gather all the information that you need, and then you figure out, you back away from it and say, what do we have to fix here? What can we do to solve this problem? And you see where there's a weakness, where there's an empty hole. Okay. So what I'm saying is, and this is just a suggestion. I don't ever, state something like this is the perfect thing. Create a structure here. Create a structure. So think about, I'm going to start a corporation. We're going to grow, but this is where we're going to start. Okay. And we start here. What do we need to have in place? And let's go to the organization, the people that have read it, and see who's going to fit that. And where are they? Zoom calls. Get on a Zoom call. You build that circle of the board of directors, or whatever you want to call it, of the company. And you start putting your heads together, but we create, and I'm hoping that I can see the connection on how to address this from, let's say, from an American point of view, because I'm Italian heritage, so I understand the Italian way of life. I also understand I'm going to be 84 years old in another few weeks. And what I understand is that years ago, everything was local. So I'm about to try and help build a local community here, build a model someplace, maybe in every continent, one. And you build that model, you make it work, and you let everybody know that it's there. Because my whole thing is that I thought the green movement, I was going to let everybody know how they could buy good food and eat good, and they would be good and healthy. Okay. And what I realized is that that's not it, because people jump in, they say, well, I can make a product and I can sell it for more money simply because it's green. And so, but that's a fake. That's people taking advantage of a system. But if we've got heads coming together, so that's the main idea that I had, is that we have to have a business structure, even organization structure, whatever you want to call it. But it has to have a structure and people working together that have expertise in those different cultures. It may have to be one in every continent,
Marie,
or country.
Thank you very much. And I
That's
love
it.
I love your point about tapping into the intelligence
And the skills.
of the people, because that's the foundation of Sarvodha in Sri Lanka that you're going to read about,
Right.
Which is in the 60s. They actually started with the villagers themselves,
Right.
identifying what they call 10 basic needs. And from those 10 basic needs, they actually found 260 sub-needs. So literally taking villagers who were at that point maybe pre-literate or just becoming literate,
Mhm.
who could operate at a high cognitive and also a spiritual level to focus on
Yes.
what their own needs, and they met those needs themselves. And the uniqueness of Dr. Aryaratne as a community
I know
developer
of him. Yeah.
is when he went into those villages, he wasn't there to, in a sense, lord over them. He wasn't there in a kind of a traditional consultant sense where he was, making money off of it, or he was trying to do it so he can get political power. There's a lot of ego-based reasons that are
Right.
legitimate, but they're not going to be able to achieve the results that you're describing. That requires being able to hold space, and that itself is an interior
Yes.
self-development capacity.
Yes.
It's a fluency. So
Yes.
this capacity for cultivation and spiritual development is integrated into how you build community. They're not separate. So what I'm introducing is an idea where it's coherent. Spiritual development, community development, they're really reflective of the same pattern. And that is hard in the West. That's the challenge. That's the biggest challenge that I believe that I face, in that the model in Sri Lanka is something that's
Oh yeah.
it's fundamentally unique in that it fully integrates the spiritual life with action. It's not
Yeah.
separate. It's not like get your house in order and grow spiritually, and then only then you start doing the work. Or the opposite would be focusing on political or social and economic action, but not having
Right.
a heart. It's full integration, and that's what I'm sharing, and that's what's exciting to me about it. Thank you very much, Fred.
Yeah. Okay. Could I just say one more thing, and that is it's like we've got to change the mindset of people so they can receive the information that you want to tell them. Because if they're set that this is how I believe things should be, and this is what I've been pondering is like the best thing I can do is get out there and speak about how people have the mindsets get changed with them, and basically we all want the same things, but we're all like, I believe it needs this way, and I believe it. So yeah. Okay,
Yeah,
I'll go. I'll
thank
shut
you
up
for
now.
that. Great comments. Thank you, Fred.
Yeah,
Fred from,
one thing,
yep.
a thing that I was going to mention is we have one gentleman here who has a marketplace for entrepreneurs and individuals. He's got a space for there's 250 different people who have a small part of a shop in a town mall that can have a space to sell their product or offer their service. But Richard, what I was going to say, I know you want to not tell people that there's only one way to do this, but based on the comments here, I think it would be very helpful if you spent an hour and a half Zoom session on telling people the process you used, the steps you took in initially starting the conscious community movement here in Reno. uh, and then people can say, okay, I can pick this from that or that, but I know you don't want to tell people this is the one and only way. But I hear a lot of people saying things like, I wish I had some idea
Yep. Fred,
of what steps to take in what order, and
thank you.
maybe
Your
that's in the
internet
book.
is a
But
little spotty. You're breaking up.
yeah, yeah, yes, it is. So anyway, I think it would be helpful for you to share your experience here in the first couple of years.
Okay. So you mean, well, today we're running short of time. You mean another meeting? Okay, excellent. Because what I've done is, in the way I've written the book, the first network that I built is in chapter 4, section 1. And then chapter 6 of section 2 is building the local living economy network, then the conscious community network, then the food system network, then the arts and culture network. So those are interspersed in the story. And I've written it in a narrative rather than just step by step, because I hope that people will pick it up more from their heart rather than just from their step by step, just from their head. I hope it to be both. Thank you very much. Ida.
Hi. Yeah, I have a few questions. It's more like about your vision. If you said before that it was happening for thousands of years already, and we still don't have it actually, like in majority in the world, right?
Yep.
So the first question is, how much time do you think it will get, and what's your vision for that? How many steps it will take?
Yeah.
How fast is it possible to do, or how slow? The second question is about local businesses that you said, okay, we need to be more local and stuff. But COVID showed us really well that it may not work because the government says, okay, you don't have you cannot open your business actually in this place. I mean, what we have with Ukraine, it's I personally been there when the war is, and you have complete human right. You don't have human rights there basically, so you cannot even build a business normally because you have government who makes all these regulations. And even in Lithuania here, we have some communities, ecological villages, where they build their own communities. And when I ask them, well, what will you going to do if the government decides to, that we don't have a right for our own residents, for example, right? It should be all governmental. And what will you gonna do, because you will lose your home, you cannot separate from all this, and it will affect you somehow. So yeah.
Excellent question. You're from Lithuania?
Yes.
Thank you for that. The first question was the vision for how this could roll out. So just a couple things related to that. Probably 4 years ago, when I was reflecting on that question, I kind of defaulted to a traditional idea that building a global network, like a think tank global network. But I suddenly realized that with a global network that's top down, that its tendency is actually, even though it's global and it sounds like it can help accelerate local communities, it actually can't work that way because of its own inertia. Instead, I've seen that what works, like in Sarvodia, and then from the experience I have in Northern Nevada, that a fractal approach works best. And what that means is you look for universal principles and practices that could be accessible to any individual anywhere in the world, that doesn't require a high level of organizational expertise, doesn't require them to raise money. They don't need staff. So what I've shared in the book is my own experience of doing that. So I'll give you one example that'll give you an idea of what fractal would be like. So currently, there's an estimate that there's probably 2 million little tiny villages, towns, and cities. I've identified 50,000 of them. That's probably a safe number. I mean, just in India alone, there could be hundreds of thousands, but just say 50,000 villages, towns, and cities worldwide. In many of those villages, towns, and cities, there might be something like a local food system network that we've developed. Probably unlikely. There's different stages of building something like that. People have, in communities, they might have one version or another. But imagine just this. Imagine if there were just one individual in each of the 50,000 communities who had the desire, they have the capability, they have the capacity, they have the personality, where they could actually, on their own, by reaching out to others through a step-by-step process of building a food system network in their community. So that's a fractal and a scalable approach, where the idea is not to build top-down infrastructure thinking that you need to support these folks. Rather, build a capacity for local communities to do this themselves, and find a communication marketing approach to get the word out about their capability of doing that. And I believe that it would, in this approach, if it is straightforward enough, and after the book comes out and I want to start working with leaders who want to implement, the idea is to develop simple methodologies and approaches that could be more digestible even than the book, so that literally you can develop thousands of local food system networks in a month. They could just start. It doesn't require a bureaucracy. I think the bureaucracy approach or top-down global organization approach will not work in this age. It actually has to be both, but it has to start at the bottom, and there has to be a fractal approach. In order to do that, it has to be extremely accessible and simple and straightforward. It cannot be complex, and it has to be, made so that somebody could develop this themselves. I know in Sri Lanka, in Sarvodia, when they had 15,000 villages participating, there was a call to build a community garden. And over a period of time, there were probably thousands of these gardens emerging. It's because they already had the infrastructure that they can then implement a simple idea. So the idea of building a local food system network, as I've described, is not rocket science. It's just up to now, there's not been the intention to do it. And it's been restricted to a narrow class of people, experts, network weavers and others. There's nothing wrong with those folks, but I'm trying to orient this just to average people that can do something like this themselves and then expand that idea of building a food system network. Or I'm working with this other group that wants to build networks around arts and culture. The reason for these 12 common needs to organize around is people are already doing that. It's nothing new. It's not like a new project. It's just a new context. So the answer to your question is, I don't really know how fast that will take, but I think it could be I think it's going to be surprising. I think it'll just be something that'll emerge at some point, and the mainstream media is going to look at this and they're going to say, what the heck just happened? Where'd that come from? It's because they're out of touch. They're disconnected from the grassroots, disconnected from the people. And as long as we, those who want to implement, make sure that our connections are with the people, that we're working alongside the people, that we're with them. It's not us coming in to lead over them. It's us working with them. Those of us that have some more knowledge and experience coming in, and we've got to serve the needs of the most disenfranchised, the most marginalized, have got to be our focus. And we've got to keep that in mind. So in that sense, I think it could be really exciting and can grow quickly. That's my hope. The second question about regulation, you bring up a great point. The only experience I could share is that, and I described this I can't even remember what chapter it is. I think it's chapter 7 about the local food system network. But in 2005 in Reno, local food was like not on the radar of the politicians, the government, and the business community. Through a process of building a food system network, we got all the organizations, including local government departments, involved in the process of building it. Therefore, we built food system consciousness, and it was unstoppable. Within 6 months to a year of building a network around food, we literally, in a sense, recaptured I guess the energy of that kind of system. It was against local food. Now it became all in favor of local food, and tons of projects emerged from that kind of new context. We didn't have to go to the city council. We didn't have to go to the county commission, didn't need to go to the state, because we had the grassroots, we had the people, and we had the leaders in the organizations. It's unstoppable. That's part of the process of building a parallel governance. That's how it emerges. I don't have the answer to the end because I'm not focusing on the end. I just want to get people started. But I think that from my experience, political governance follows economic coherence. Economic coherence follows social coherence. Social coherence follows cultural coherence. Cultural coherence follows spiritual coherence on shared purpose, virtues, and principles. Once people have a set of universal purpose, principles, and virtues and actions, then it's all they need. And I think there's enough that's universal. What I'd like to do, thank you, Ida. Before we close, I'm sensitive to time, everybody, if you would go to the chat, and if you look at the top, there's three little dots. It says save chat. So there's been a lot of material and contacts and people shared there. So if you don't mind, everybody, if you would like to capture some of the information there, I would just go to the save chat and do that right now, if you don't mind.
After I hit save chat, then what do I do with it?
So you go to save chat and
Where does it go? I
you
don't know how
hit
to find
save.
it.
You hit save chat. It's probably in your I think it's in your download file. Does anybody know where it goes? I think it goes to your download file.
Yeah,
Well,
but
well, for me,
it does
for
goes in your
me,
download file, but it's under the Zoom folder.
Okay, so go to Documents. I think if you're on Windows, you go to Documents and then you go to the Zoom folder and then you'll see the chat there. If everybody would, I need to wrap up the meeting to be honoring
Jerry?
your time. Jack, I want to close now unless it's something really quick.
So
Jack,
just to say,
it
I
is
can't
really,
download on the mobile, so I don't know if you can upload or just send it by email, maybe the chat file. Or
I'll do that. I think I've got your.
thank you very much.
You're welcome.
That's wonderful, Richard. Thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. So I'd like to
well, it is very quick, Richard. It's just a matter, have you worked at all with the social solidarity economy?
Let me address that. Thank you, Jack. Just really quickly, is what Jack is referring to is there's a variety of movements that have emerged in the last 20 years to develop new economies. And I talk about this in chapter 6, and I think the challenge with any specific of those movements is they typically have a political flavor to them. That is, they're oriented maybe either liberal left or they're maybe right or conservative, and they're not middle of the road in a sense. So the challenge is that while there are these multiple networks that are trying to achieve something that seems similar, their flavor, their brand sometimes is very narrowing. They'll only attract people that might have, say, a liberal left progressive bias or a right-wing conservative bias. And the idea of symbiotic culture is to identify all of these movements in a local community across all those differences. Anyway, would like to thank everybody for coming. And I just want to share just a minute, if that's okay, and then let you guys go. So I really appreciate your time today. It was so helpful, especially, with the surveys and this meeting. My sense is that the consensus is get this book out rapidly. And I'm committed to do that. So committed to getting it out in early spring. What it means is shifting a little bit from the frame that I've been in. I was going to have a standalone third section as the quote unquote training guide, but I'm realizing that if I did that right now, it would delay the books being released for probably 6 months to a year. And I don't want to do that. I'm really would like to, get this out as soon as possible, so that people can start engaging it, and then we can start, meetings, and then those that want to develop these ideas, that we work together to develop what will be then a standalone book that's a training guide. I think it's better to have that emerge as a co-creation amongst people that are actually in the field wanting to implement this in their communities. And I believe that's what it's feeling to me. So it's a little shift. Anyway, Steve, did you have any last remarks?
I really appreciated everyone's participation and eagerness to share, and recognizing that something like this is what is needed, and are ready to be part of the process of developing how this rolls out.
Exactly. I'm really happy to be with you today and get your continued feedback. And that's how symbiotic culture is. I'm not really promoting these ideas as they're not mine. They're not my ideas. It's not personal. I am looking at patterns that I've experienced both from my own understanding spiritually in my own faith journey, but also in community building. And so this is something that's been developing kind of like under the surface. It's been present. And I just believe that we need to integrate even what the ancients knew in what's called the first axial age, which is 3,000 years ago. Throughout the world, there was just this understanding of a broader perspective beyond the tribe, and it was a transcendent idea that was cross-cultural and cross the religions of the time in this old world. But those ideas, even though they're ancient, they're needed today because we've somehow unplugged those basic spiritual and ancient wisdom. We've unplugged it in the desire to advance materially in this kind of economic system that we have. And that's why I'm so happy to be able to share, because it's not really coming from me. I'm just a scribe. I'm just writing. I'm really happy. It takes a burden off too to be in that role, to be, to know that it's something that is universal. It's not dependent on me. I'm just doing my best to activate this within each of us, and ultimately it's up to each of us in our local communities to do this. That's how this kind of movement will develop. It's not going to be from any external organization or even me. That's not my role. My role is not to build this. My role is to more like a cheerleader. Anyway, thank you so much, everybody. And you have a wonderful rest of the week. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you to all you who put your things in your emails in the chat.
Thank you.